In the modern landscape of American masculinity, there exists a pervasive and dangerous myth that is whispered in locker rooms, echoed on internet forums, and reinforced by a culture obsessed with conquest. It is the lie that a man's sexual indiscretions, his affairs, his calculated dual lives, his late-night indulgences are merely biological side effects of his virility. We are told that men are naturally polygamous, that the high-value man exercises his options, and that what happens in the dark creates no consequences other than the risk of getting caught. This is the surface-level delusion that keeps men weak. The uncomfortable truth, the one that sits at the terrifying core of dark truth therapy, is that an unfaithful man does not destroy his family first, he destroys himself first. The collapse is not external. It is an internal implosion of the psyche that begins the moment the act is committed. When we strip away the societal excuses and the bravado of it's just sex, we are left with a raw, biopsychological reality. Infidelity is not a display of power, it is a manifestation of fragmentation. In the United States, where the divorce rate hovers near 50% and the consumption of illicit content reaches billions of views annually, we are witnessing a crisis not of morality, but of masculine integration. When a man engages in infidelity, he is not simply breaking a rule set by a partner or a church. He is violating the structural integrity of his own mind. He may convince his conscious ego that he is a conqueror, a king taking what he wants, but in the deep, primal recesses of his limbic system, a different narrative is being written. It is a narrative of cowardice, secrecy, and fracture. The immediate aftermath of betrayal is rarely the triumphant feeling of a conquest. It is followed by the four horsemen of internal ruin: guilt, shame, fear, and fragmentation. These are not poetic metaphors. They are tangible neurochemical states that begin to rewire the brain. Guilt acts as a background static, a subtle signal that one's actions are misaligned with their identity. Shame is the visceral recoil, the feeling that one is fundamentally flawed. Fear becomes the new baseline, a hyper-vigilant state of protecting the lie. Finally, fragmentation occurs, the splitting of the man into two entities, the public avatar who smiles and shakes hands, and the shadow self who skulks in the dark. We must ask the question that drives the very philosophy of deep psychological work. What physically and mentally happens to a man when his daily actions violently contradict the person he believes himself to be? The answer is not just that he feels regret. The answer is that he ceases to be a unified force. He becomes a collection of fabrications held together by a fading will. He loses the very thing that defines true masculine power: congruency. This is the dark truth that the modern world obscures with endless distractions. Infidelity doesn't just break trust with others. It shatters the man's concept of himself, leaving him hollowed out, weak, and susceptible to a total collapse of identity. To understand the profound devastation caused by infidelity, we must look beyond the relationship and dissect the psychological architecture of the masculine mind itself. Men, across history and evolutionary biology, are built on a framework of order, discipline, and defined identity. The masculine psyche thrives on competence and the alignment between word and deed. For thousands of years, a man's worth was inextricably tied to his ability to impose order onto chaos, to protect and to provide. This ancient wiring still exists. When a man commits to a partner, he is staking his honor, his very identity on that promise. This is not about romance. It is about the structural capability of his will. When he cheats, he introduces chaos into his own system. The phenomenon at play here is best described by the psychological theory of cognitive dissonance, introduced by Leon Festinger. This is the intense mental stress experienced when a person holds two or more contradictory beliefs, values, or realities simultaneously. In the context of the unfaithful man, a violent civil war erupts within his head. There is the ideal self, the version of him that wants to be strong, honest, a leader in his community, and a pillar for his family. Then there is the shadow self, the version ruled by fleeting impulses, the one that lies to cover his tracks and prioritizes momentary dopamine hits over long-term duty. These two selves cannot coexist peacefully. To survive this conflict, the mind begins to fracture. The man attempts to compartmentalize his life, believing he can be a savage in secret and a saint in public. However, modern psychology and the principles of the shadow reveal a fatal flaw in this strategy. The human brain does not compartmentalize. It interconnects. You cannot be a liar in the bedroom and a truth-teller in the boardroom indefinitely. The rot spreads. The cognitive load required to maintain two separate realities erodes the self-concept. When an unfaithful man looks in the mirror, he no longer sees a unified entity. He sees an actor. He knows something the world doesn't, that he is performing a role. This realization is the death knell for masculine confidence. True confidence is born from the knowledge that you are exactly who you say you are. When that alignment is broken, the man becomes a shell, forcing him to simulate confidence through arrogance or material flashing, while internally he feels like a fraud. It is critical here to distinguish between the act of sex and the misuse of sexual energy. Dark truth therapy posits that sexual intercourse, when engaged in with intent and connection, is one of the most potent sources of bioelectric energy a man possesses. It is life-affirming and vital. The error, the sin against the self, lies in the misuse of this power. Infidelity, compulsive masturbation, and indiscriminate promiscuity are not expressions of high libido. They are expressions of energy leakage. When a man scatters his seed and his focus among people he does not value, or flushes it away in the isolation of a dark room to pixels on a screen, he is draining his vital force. He is proving that he is a slave to his biology rather than the master of his destiny. A king does not sneak around in the shadows or hide his phone screen. A thief does. And when a man acts like a thief long enough, he inevitably begins to think like one, dismantling his own psychology from the inside out. We are conditioned to think of guilt as a purely moral or religious emotion, a feeling reserved for the confessional booth. However, in the realm of neurobiology and high-performance physiology, guilt is something far more dangerous. It is a metabolically expensive state that drains human battery life. Guilt is not merely a fleeting thought. It is a persistent physiological event, a background noise that never ceases. It is akin to a computer running a massive, unoptimized program in the background that consumes all the processing power, leaving the system sluggish and prone to crashing. Consider the neuroscience of deceit. When a man tells the truth, his brain simply accesses a memory and relays it. The neural pathway is direct, efficient, and costs very little glucose and oxygen. Conversely, when a man lies, which is the absolute prerequisite of infidelity, his brain is forced into a state of hyperactivity. He must suppress the truth, construct a fabrication that fits the timeline, and simultaneously monitor the listener's face to gauge if the lie is being believed. This places a massive cognitive load on the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for decision-making, focus, and leadership. This constant state of red alert triggers the sympathetic nervous system, flooding the body with cortisol, the primary stress hormone. This leads us to a biological reality that every man must understand: the Cortisol-Testosterone Axis. Scientific studies have repeatedly shown that cortisol is the biological antagonist of testosterone. When cortisol levels remain chronically high, driven by the fear of exposure, the guilt of betrayal, and the stress of maintaining a double-life testosterone production is suppressed. The physiological consequences are severe and contradictory to the virile image the cheater tries to project. Symptoms include chronic fatigue, brain fog, loss of muscle density, anxiety, and ironically, psychogenic erectile dysfunction. The man who cheats to validate his masculinity is engaging in a chemical process that literally castrates him hormonally. From a Jungian perspective, this internal state is the shadow's revenge. Carl Jung famously noted that what we resist persists. The guilt that is ignored or pushed down does not vanish. It sinks into the subconscious and transforms into a complex. Every lie told to a partner is, fundamentally, a lie told to oneself first. It is an admission that I am not strong enough to handle my reality, so I must escape it. The energy a man spends deleting messages, creating alibis, and looking over his shoulder is energy he is not spending on building his empire, honing his craft, or leading his lineage. He is leaking power every second of the day. The cheater's mantra is, no one needs to know, but the dark truth is that his body knows. His nervous system keeps the score, and the accumulation of this toxic energy eventually leads to a total system failure. Once the psychological structure fractures and the biological energy begins to leak, the external manifestation of this decay becomes visible. This is the phase of the erosion of self-respect. It is a subtle, creeping paralysis that changes how a man carries himself in the world. A man who operates with total integrity possesses a natural, undeniable weight. He can hold eye contact without flinching. He speaks with finality because his words are backed by truth. He has nothing to hide, and therefore, he has nothing to fear. In contrast, the man living a lie begins to shrink, physically and spiritually. The symptoms of this erosion are evident in the nuances of behavior. We see the averted gaze, where a man subconsciously stops looking people in the eye, not just his spouse, but his business partners, his children, and his peers. Deep down, he fears that if they look too closely, they will see the rot beneath the surface. We see a rise in defensive aggression. When questioned about simple matters, the unfaithful man often snaps or becomes irritable. This is the psychological defense mechanism of projection. He attacks others because he feels constantly under attack by his own conscience. The natural confidence that comes from being a man of his word evaporates, replaced by a shaky, performative bravado that collapses under pressure. This dynamic is painfully visible in the recurring dramas of American public life. We see the archetype of the nice guy or the moral crusader politicians, religious leaders, or celebrities who build their brands on wholesome values, only to be exposed in scandalous downfalls. Before the news breaks, these men often exhibit a frantic, overcompensating energy. They scream about morality while violating it in private. Internally, the dialogue is brutal. The man begins to hold himself in contempt. There is perhaps no torture worse for the male psyche than receiving praise for being a good man while knowing with absolute certainty that he is a fraud. Every compliment feels like an insult. Every accolade feels like a spotlight on his shame. This loss of self-respect inevitably leads to emotional collapse. The unfaithful man becomes prone to mood swings, unexplained depression, and a pervasive sense of imposter syndrome that bleeds into his career. He thinks he is chasing freedom through his affairs, but in reality, he is building a prison. He is forced to curate every word, monitor every digital footprint, and sanitize every interaction. He is not free. He is a slave to his secrets. As the philosophy of this channel dictates, infidelity does not make you more of a man. It renders you unable to look the man in the mirror in the eye. He becomes a ghost in his own life, present physically at the dinner table, but spiritually absent, hiding behind a towering wall of deceit. When the grinding weight of guilt merges with the corrosive acid of shame, they give birth to the most destructive force in the human psyche: self-hatred. This is the terminal stage of the collapse. It is here that the man, subconsciously convinced of his own badness, begins to punish himself. But he does not punish himself with pain, he punishes himself with pleasure. This paradox is known as the addiction loop, and it is the engine behind the self-destruction of countless high-potential men. The brain of the unfaithful man is under immense stress due to high cortisol levels. To relieve this pressure, the brain screams for a release, a high dopamine spike to numb the anxiety. Consequently, the man turns to high-intensity stimuli, more infidelity, compulsive consumption of pornography, alcohol, drugs, or high-risk gambling. This creates a cycle of destruction. The trigger is the stress and guilt of the double life. The action is seeking a numbing agent: sex, porn, substances. The result is a temporary relief, a fleeting dopamine high. But the aftermath is a crash. When the high fades, the guilt returns, now amplified because the behavior was repeated. This pushes the man to seek an even bigger hit next time, accelerating the downward spiral. This phenomenon has devastating implications for a man's career and purpose. Studies in business ethics have shown a statistically significant correlation between CEOs who engage in personal misconduct and those who commit corporate fraud. The blurring of boundaries in one's personal life inevitably degrades judgment in professional life. The mental bandwidth required to maintain lies leaves no room for deep, strategic work. We see this in the burnout of high-level executives who seem to have it all but suddenly make catastrophic decisions. Their minds are so fragmented by dopamine loops and the shame spiral that they lose the ability to engage in sustained, logical thought. They are not stupid. They are distracted by their own shadow. This is the tragedy of waste. It is not merely about a broken marriage. It is about the incineration of human potential. In various traditions, this vital energy is called ojas, or simply drive. Healthy sexuality transmutes this drive into creativity, business building, and legacy. Toxic sexuality, infidelity, porn addiction, and excess dissipates this drive. It pours the jet fuel on the ground and lights a match. The man becomes hollow. He may retain the trappings of success, the suit, the car, the title, but inside, there is a vacuum. He is run by his impulses, not his will. He becomes a biological robot, chasing the next hit of validation to silence the voice in his head that screams his own unworthiness. This exhaustion is silent, but it is more devastating than any workload stress. It is a burnout of the soul. We must be unequivocally clear. Infidelity is not a small mistake, a lapse in judgment, or a boys will be boys moment. It is a systemic failure of the masculine operating system. It is self-destruction from the inside out. We have traced the collapse from the psychological splitting of the self to the biological draining of testosterone, through the erosion of self-respect, and finally into the abyss of self-hatred and addiction. Infidelity destroys the unity of the psyche, creates a civil war between the persona and the shadow, and renders a man incapable of true power. Society, and often the toxic corners of the manosphere, tries to tell you that a player is a strong man. Dark truth therapy reveals the opposite. A man who cannot control his sexual impulses is weak. He is a slave to his biology, no better than an animal driven by season and scent. A man who requires validation from multiple women to feel valuable has no internal value. He is an empty vessel begging to be filled by external approval. A truly strong man, a high-value man in the deepest sense, is one who possesses the capacity for great destruction but chooses discipline. He is the man who harnesses his sexual energy, retains it, and directs it like a laser toward his purpose, his legacy, and his chosen loyalty. Integrity is not a moral suggestion. It is a mechanism of power. When you keep your word gains weight in the universe. When you align your actions with your values, you become a force of nature. Infidelity does not just destroy a relationship. It destroys the soul of the man. When you lie to the woman who trusts you, you are not outsmarting her. You are dismantling the architecture of your own character. You are trading your kingship for a moment of cheap, fleeting pleasure. Ask yourself, do you want to be a slave to your impulses, hiding in the dark, terrified of exposure? Or do you want to be a master of your reality, walking in the light of your own truth? The final verdict is inescapable. When a man betrays another, he betrays the strongest version of himself first. If you are ready to confront the lies you've been told, if you are tired of leaking your power and are ready to build a legacy of true masculine authority, you have found your tribe. This path is not for the weak. It is for those who are ready to reclaim their shadow. Smash that like button if you value the truth. Subscribe to Dark Truth Therapy. Join us, master yourself, or remain a slave.